What's going on, everyone? Happy Monday. Hope you all had a great weekend. Welcome to the TDR Traded Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales. Today's podcast, what does it include? The country's 19th largest bank, First Citizens Bank, made an announcement over the weekend that they're now entering the cannabis space. We're going to dive into what that announcement means as well. We also heard news on Friday pertaining to Germany. Are you surprised at all that Tilray and Aurora didn't move early on? We'll get some takes from some of the guys as well. It's a big week coming up. We got GTI, Verano, and Trulieve with earnings. So we'll break it down with both Anthony and Guap as to what they'll be watching in this earnings report. And most importantly, it's MSOS Monday. Dan Ahrens joins us once again to touch on some of the topics that I just outlined. So let's get right to it and welcome in TDR co-host back from the Florida Keys, Anthony Varell. Hope you got some good sun. Good to see you. Happy Monday.
How's it going? I actually did. My forehead, you can't really see it, but it's fried. I was playing pickleball with the hat backwards. Yeah.
You got better Wi-Fi today too.
Yeah. So no technical difficulties today.
Nice. Let's bring in Guap. Happy Monday, Guap. I think we did a good job on Friday. Let us know, people. What'd you think? How did Guap and I do on Friday holding the fort down?
Guten Tag, Herr Dales, wie geht's? Ganz gut. Okay.
I think I understand.
Yeah, Friday was an awesome day for all of German legalization efforts. So yeah, it was fun to hold it down. I'm back in the Southeast, no longer in Florida. Also played a lot of pickleball, Anthony. So I'm ready. I'm ready to face off.
Oh, boys. Pickleball, is that the fastest growing sport in North America right now?
It really is.
It is. It's entertaining, but I prefer tennis. I mean, I enjoy playing it, but tennis is just more fun to play, at least in my opinion.
Lucifer writes, we did well on Friday. Thank you, Lucifer. I appreciate that. All right, let's jump into today's podcast. First segment, Into the Wire, outlined the biggest headlines in cannabis. And as I said off the top, First Citizens Bank, the country's 19th largest bank, has now entered into the cannabis industry, which proves obviously to be another big step in the right direction for the overall industry. So, Guap, beginning with you, this announcement makes them the largest known bank to service the cannabis industry. And it's interesting because there's a lot of questions that come to mind. Some of them, like, why now? Do they know something we don't? Is this a sign of things to come? And then you can speculate even more. Like, is this potentially maybe yet another regional bank story that has a more of an overarching story? But interesting to say the least, based on what was outlined this weekend.
Yeah, that was some good foreshadowing, Shad, into our speculation, and that's what it is, speculation. We would really need to get them on to answer these types of questions, but it was unexpected, right? I mean, this is a large bank with, what, 200 plus billion in assets. They were servicing the hemp industry to some extent, but they've now extended that to cannabis. So we can speculate and guess on a few reasons why. Do they know something, like when the DA decision is going to come out? I would speculate not, but maybe they're front running it a little bit. They're leading the way, and other banks will follow. And that's a great thing for the industry, which has been, as we've covered, chronically underserved by the banking industry. And it didn't even take safe banking to pass to give them cover. So
yeah,
we can speculate maybe they did it because they kind of need the money. They're front running, and maybe they just sort of are willing to accept the risk of any sort of negative action coming their way, knowing that it's all going to be resolved here shortly.
Anthony, do you know much background on this bank?
No, background on the bank, I don't know at all except for the name. To be completely honest, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, just so we're on the same page. I mean, I know Guap mentioned they have 200 billion in assets. The top 6 banks in the U.S., I think, have 1.4 trillion in assets and above, with JP Morgan having 3.6 trillion in assets alone. So, I mean, while they are a top 20 bank, I mean, they hail in comparison to the financial institutions that you want to see coming in. But, I mean, we'll take anything we can get. I mean, if a bank of that stature wants to start banking the cannabis industry and offer more financial products and more loans with I guess, more favorable coupons, then I'm all for it. I'd have to guess that in their compliance department or somewhere internally, someone is either foreshadowing or knows something that's coming down the pipe, and they're just
You
getting
think?
in front of. I mean, it's a bank.
Yeah.
Banks can't fuck around. Anything
True.
that has to do with Schedule I narcotics, anything that has to do with the AML laws. I mean, those have direct ramifications on their banking charter. Bank gets a charter revoked, they're out of business.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're not going to do anything to potentially have any ramifications against that. So I mean, I think it's a net positive. It's a good headline. I mean, I know the original story was one of the largest banks in the U.S., which I guess that's to be determined or to be interpreted. But it's great. I'm hoping that we start to see more.
Yeah. If banks are doing their due diligence, then word spreads fast. Do you think this is a sign of things to come in Q1, Q2? Guap, Anthony, either one of you?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many more are going to follow suit here before we see something more firm on the federal level. But I was just very surprised to see this announcement. It's great news if we can get some lower interest loans to these cannabis businesses, big and small. I know they need it, and so I'm hoping a few more follow, and certainly if something like safe banking or and or Schedule III comes through, you'll see a rush to it. Hopefully maybe this triggers more of the bank's compliance departments to start doing more due diligence and get ready.
Yeah. This is Into the Wire, segment 1 of the Traded Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, with Anthony Varell and Guap here on a Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend. As usual, please like this video. Please like, share this video with your network, and click on that bell for notifications and subscribe to our channel. As I've said before, we want to build this community, especially if we get rescheduling announced, build a strong community and get the word out there as much as possible. And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, the Baked In newsletter. Will be coming up with this week's equity research report that is exclusive to Baked In newsletter subscribers. All right, let's go on to headline number 2 as we shift now. We got a big week coming up. Finally, some stuff to talk about. Anthony, it's earnings week, and some big names on deck include Verano, Trulieve, and the behemoth of the industry, GTI. So let's begin with you. What are you watching? We'll first touch on Trulieve.
Yeah. So I mean, it's going to be a pretty good week, especially for the tier ones. With the caveat to what you just said, I think IPR is actually about to announce here after the bell. So we'll chew through those earnings, and we'll have something about that on Wednesday.
Okay.
Trulieve, I'm looking for them to kind of grow quarter over quarter. I mean, Trulieve kind of topped out in Q2 2022 with $330 million in top line revenue. We've seen quarter over quarter declines since then, to the tune of around, I think it's around 13%. They did 313 Q2 2022. Last quarter, they did $275 million in top line revenue. However, that was an uptick from Q2 2023. Okay. So if we get growth here again, from a gross margin perspective and a top line revenue perspective, that means that they bottomed out essentially Q2 2023. Yeah. So modest growth the last quarter. Maybe we see modest incremental growth this quarter. And that's really what I'm looking at, is for their numbers to keep going up and trending in that direction, and break the trend that we've seen since Q2 2022.
Yeah.
Then what I'm most excited to see is Verano. So Verano last quarter decided to break out their revenue from a wholesale and a retail perspective with all the states that they're in. That is industry leading, and something that I listened to on Jerry from Bengal Capital was on a podcast last week, something that he was very adamant on, and something that I do strongly agree with him with. Those data points are what we are going to need for institutional investors to come into this sector. They're going to want to see store comps. They're going to want to see same store sales. They're going to want to see insights into the market. I mean, if you can't see the actual growth and the numbers that are coming out of these markets and being able to measure them on a quarter over quarter basis, and just giving these black box top line numbers to a business that is hyper fragmented versus having any congruency whatsoever due to the states' rights and the market by market being completely different, you're not really getting a good picture as to the overall health of the business.
Yeah.
Someone like Cresco, I would love to see their markets broken out and being able to see what their wholesale numbers are and what their retail numbers are on a market by market basis. You can then start to drill down more into their margin profile and where that's actually coming from and start to get a real picture of what's going on within the business. With Verano, I'm looking to see what's going on with Florida. Companies like Cresco have been trending up. I think Move has also been trending up or stable in the Florida market. And Florida is their number one market by revenue. Illinois is their number two market by revenue. From what I've heard, Illinois is actually not doing too well as a whole. Don't know about Verano's business, but I know it's been contracting and there's been price compression there as a whole in the state of Illinois. So I'm curious to comp the numbers this quarter, retail and wholesale in Illinois versus last, and be able to create a baseline. Their New Jersey business, I'm looking really forward to looking into, but really getting the granularity and getting the real insights into their business market by market is what I'm looking most forward to with Verano.
So if you want to garner attention from institutions, and this is the way you should be formatting, I guess, a lot of your earnings, why don't you think more companies are doing this, or do you think a lot of companies will start to be doing this right away?
I think companies aren't doing it because I don't think they want you to see what's going on in the markets, just to be completely honest. I mean, I might get some pushback from that. And I mean, if any of the CEOs don't agree with me, I'd love to have an open conversation with you as per why you're not including these metrics in your earnings report. I would love to see them included in your earnings report on a go-forward basis across the board. I mean, I think this is one thing that we need to standardize across the cannabis industry. But it's nice to give opacity and to really have a black box into your business from an outsider's perspective. And I mean, retail investors aren't going to be able to push that narrative and force that change. But that change is going to need to come if you're going to want to get institutional investors to take this industry seriously and actually be able to look into these businesses and really understand what's going on under the hood.
Guap, I see you nodding your head. You agree with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point that Anthony is echoing, that Bengal Cap, Jerry's podcast was excellent. Perhaps the days of using vague or creative accounting are coming to a close here. Institutional investors have a higher threshold when it comes to that sort of thing. They're going to want to know more. The only other thing that occurs to me is, other than just wanting to be vague for vague's sake, is, maybe there's a slight competitive advantage to not telling your competition how you're doing in a particular state. Because if you're soft in one state and you're killing it in another, that could alter the plans of your competition. So they're probably maybe just, if that's a valid reason, they're sort of doing it while they still can. And those days could be coming to a close, and we want them to. I mean, us as retail investors, we want institutions to get involved. We want them to have the information, and so do we. Selfishly.
And then GTI. I mean, they're coming off a heavy capex cycle. I think they spent about $100 million on capex last year. So I mean, they should be in growth mode. I know Broxine came out with an article this morning that was basically like a hit piece on them. The general consensus is for the revenue to come in a little bit light. I think they might surprise. And I mean, if not, they're looking at the largest growth catalyst that they've ever been looking at in terms of adult use market conversion that the company's ever seen. PA, Florida, Virginia, New York. GTI's got a huge growth catalyst in front of them. So, I mean, Alan might be bearish on the stock today, but I mean, the stock market is pricing in future growth. It's not pricing in past growth. I'm buying GTI today, but I think it's going to look like a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. Not modest quarter-over-quarter growth in a highly restricted, fragmented market as it stands today.
Well said. Well said. You guys actually put out some good stuff in the show notes regarding Trulieve and their cash position, what it'll look like after repaying the $130 million in debt back in December. That'll be an interesting stat, I think, that people will be watching closely as well.
Yeah, I mean, they redeemed $130 million in their, I think it was senior secured notes on December 1st of last year. There was a lot of talk about how they're actually going to do this. I think they had $190 million in cash on the balance sheet as of the last earnings report. I'm curious to see the cash position and where they stand from balance sheet perspective as well.
Go ahead, Guap.
Yeah, one more high-level point here. the reason I'm really looking forward to earnings season is not necessarily to, every one of these MSOs has a slightly different strategy, and it's more data to let us know whether or not that strategy is actually working. Yes. But also just to get some real information. We forget these are real businesses. We're obsessed, hyper obsessing over the catalysts and the flows that they'll unlock. But we forget very quickly that these are real businesses with real results. And I'm especially looking forward to Sammy J's super tweet about what the picture looks like if you sort of remove 280 go forward, or even looking back as well, to get an idea of how that impacts some businesses different than others. So
Yeah.
I just think it's great to see the actual results rather than just constantly asking when schedule 3, like,
Yeah, I know. It distracts us a little bit, but
yeah.
here we are. Big week coming up with 3 big companies with some reports. Bobby Boucher, you sounded like a little bit like Anthony before the show. Wheat stocks suck. Go all in on crypto. But we were talking about how Bitcoin's ripping again. But yeah, it's
It is.
worth noting, right, Anthony?
I bought about $30,000 worth of Ethereum around 2:00 today.
Did you?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna hedge my misery in the cannabis industry. Hopefully, crypto rips. I mean, I've been buying Ethereum since like 2016, so I finally picked up a bunch of the ETF in my brokerage account to kind of hopefully hedge or offset the volatility in the cannabis space.
Bitcoin's up just a cool 100% in the last 6 months, and up another 5.5% today. It's at 54527 right now. So 54.5. Highest in a while.
I don't think there's any signs of that slowing down anytime soon either. But good. Let's bring on the emerging industries. This is TDR's Traded Black podcast. Good to have you in here on a Monday. We got Dan Ahrens coming up as well. We got some big guests coming up that we're going to outline later this week as well here in the show. But let's touch on topic number 3, which is Germany. You were away on Friday, Anthony. I'd be curious to get your opinion on this announcement about how the country announced adult use legalization. But more importantly, I think probably a little too soon, but I was surprised a little bit that Tilray and Aurora, some notable companies well positioned in Germany, didn't move all that much based off the news. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's great. I think Germany's either the 3rd or the 4th largest country in the world from a GDP perspective.
Yep.
I mean, they've got 80 million people, so it's a large addressable market.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody understands how they're actually going to get more cannabis into the hands of patients and people with these laws. It's very, from what I've heard, they're doing the cannabis clubs, they're allowing public consumption. There's a couple other things that lessen the stigma around them, but there's no real like adult use dispensaries or like these large adult use cannabis companies coming online. What I've heard from a lot of people is this change in the laws is going to but it's going to induce doctors to write more prescriptions that were scared beforehand. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of conjecture. That's speculation. That's not, hey, they're going to go pop up 50 retail locations and they're going to start selling through cannabis into the market. I think that there's a lot that needs to be defined with what's going to happen fundamentally, how those ramifications are going to be digested by the businesses that are there.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised that Trulieve, Tilray, Aurora, et cetera, aren't moving on this news, but it's a great headline. We're going to dive deeper into it with Pablo on Wednesday. I'm going to go through his report in greater detail tonight. He put out an 18-page report that I thought was quite insightful after I read about the first 3 or 4 pages. And we're going to do a deep dive into Germany on Wednesday on the live stream. So, I mean, I'll have much more to say to it then.
Mark that in your calendar, folks. Wednesday's Traded Black podcast. As Anthony said, Pablo Zuenich will join us once again. Guap, this seems like, yes, a big announcement. And yes, this industry does move on headlines. But it sounds almost in some ways, too, that the government is kind of indirectly walking before they run. This is going to be like a slow rollout.
And I think we're all rooting for the stage 2, pillar 2 details to come out. And I think that's when you'll start seeing some movement on on a stock price perspective, just because the timeline and what the stage 2 actually looks like. We're all rooting for it to happen. Oh God, I can't even come up with a word. We're rooting for it to happen quickly. So we, I think once some of the details surrounding that come on, then the more speculative stock price moves will start going. There's a couple kind of weird things buried in the details of this that we could get into, on Wednesday. But it's exciting. It's big news. It's got a huge ripple effect across the EU, like we talked about on Friday. I mean, what Germany does, all these other countries will follow. So net, it's a massive, massive news.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're rolling this out carefully, and we've seen when other states take this type of approach of allowing people to possess 2 ounces at home, nearly 2 ounces at home, and grow 3 plants at home, and walk around and carry and smoke cannabis up to an ounce in public, it can lead to a booming gray market. So I think they realize that, and I think we'll see Pillar 2 details to start to trickle out here soon.
Yeah. Rob H. writes, are you guys having Dan on this week to discuss the charts? That is the plan. We plan to have him on Friday. We're going to reach out to him. But yeah, every week we want to have Dan, the chart man, on.
We love Dan's.
Yeah. Every Friday. We love Dan's. That's what we do.
Speaking of Dan's, let's get into Mr. Ahrens.
Let's
got a
do
lot
that.
to discuss.
That concludes Into the Wire. Let's go on to segment number 2. It's MSOS Mondays. Cue the music. Happy Monday. How are you, sir? Hope you had a good weekend.
I did have a good weekend. I have a trouble saying happy Monday when it's a whole hell of a lot of red, but we shall survive.
Yeah.
That's okay.
You look sharp today. Is this for us, or were you somewhere else?
It's not for you. I was on Schwab Network a little while ago with the great Nicole Pedalini's. I was talking about restaurant, not talking about cannabis, talking about restaurants and Domino's earnings. So I actually do other things besides cannabis.
What?
Why?
Yeah. Why?
Well, the other funds are comparatively tiny compared to
I bet
the flagship MSOS. So.
Yeah. Chasing this damn industry. Once we actually get some good stuff going on, we won't know what to do with our lives. Chasing these stocks for our whole life. Maybe our life's kind of gotten away from us. But regardless, welcome in Monday, MSO Monday with Dan Ahrens from AdvisorShares MSOs. What'd you make? And we brought this up off the top. First Citizens Bank entering into the space. Did that grab your attention? And if so, why do you think they're getting in now?
Well, of course it grabbed our attention. We were sitting around internally and like, oh, share this with Bank of New York Mellon and look what this other competitor bank's doing. Okay. But so I think it's great. It's a positive. It's an incremental positive. Is it changing the world? No. If you really take a look under the hood and look closely at it, it's much more expanding on, the Farm Bill and hemp and the 0.3 by weight and all that kind of good stuff. So they're not really looking to do banking with major plant touching MSOs, but hey, it's a big step in the right direction. Whereas some other big banks, big custody banks, they have the blinders on and it's cannabis. No, we can't touch that or anything to do with it. So I applaud First Citizens for looking a little bit deeper and trying to codify what's legal and what's not. And as you guys talked about a little bit earlier, there may be more. There may be more looking at what First Citizens is doing.
Yeah.
But don't expect to see change overnight or anything.
Dan, with earnings season coming up, I mean, without getting into the actual granular names, is there anything that you're interested to see with these earnings prints fundamentally?
A little bit. We love that GTI pretty much always goes first, and they have a great habit of beating, don't they? Of surprising everybody. But I think everybody's expecting a little bit of a muted earnings season because we have a number of new locales coming online, but that didn't happen in Q4. That's more for 2024.
Yeah.
So now I give it a little bit of a yawn overall for what's going on with this quarter of earnings, because as we all know, we're focused on other things like federal reform a lot more.
Yes.
So I don't expect any huge positive surprises, but I also don't expect any, big disappointments or, surprises to the downside. I think it's all going to be pretty much of a boring, in a decently good way, earnings quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the conversation is going to be pretty muted around fundamentals. I mean, I agree with you there. I think most people are going to kind of harp on what are the cash positions and what companies paid their taxes last quarter, and how's that actually accruing on the balance sheet. So, I mean, balance sheet health, I think, is probably going to be a major theme versus fundamentals, because I agree with you. They're probably going to be muted. We're not going to get a Maryland coming online again to juice the numbers.
But we're excited about future quarters when we
Very
have,
much so.
I'm sure,
Pennsylvania, maybe Florida, Virginia, all sorts of things are in the hopper right now.
Well, when we first started this segment with you last month, we talked about catalyst moments that could take shape here. And Germany, we talked about this last month. It came to fruition on Friday. Big announcement, to say the least. Seems like somewhat of a slow rollout, but that's okay. At least it got done. But were you surprised at all? I actually asked Anthony and Guap this about Tilray and Aurora not really moving all that much on the initial announcements, knowing that this is an industry notoriously that moves on an announcement. But regardless, even outside of that, like, this is a big step in the right direction for the EU, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a huge step in the right direction for the EU, and our people in Washington, the United States, should have eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
I know.
I always knew that we can't break the treaty stuff from. I'm like, no, that doesn't matter.
No.
I knew none of that matters. But yeah, Germany is a huge country, a huge, very populous country. But everybody needs to remember that cannabis isn't consumed in Europe like it is in North America. There's maybe about 4.5 million potential cannabis consumers in Germany. And hey, I applaud Germany for approving it, maybe slow rolling it a little bit, because they're not New York. They're not doing what New York State did. They are taking a cautious approach, but still, it's a huge step. We're not sure where the revenue for adult use is, but it's a huge step for its impact and its carryover to the United States.
Yeah, 100%.
And what's happening on a worldwide level. What I've always said too, when you look at Curaleaf, it's basically like a call option. I mean, they didn't pay anything basically for their transaction over there, but it's all upside. So cheers to them. And it's not just Germany that Curaleaf's involved in. We got Poland, we got Turkey. They are making some good international strides, and what's happening in Germany is big. But I almost applaud investors for not jumping on dumb hype, especially when you're talking about the LPs like Tilray and Aurora. So
yes,
people were smart enough to take the news in for what it really was.
Yeah.
And it's not a huge benefit to those stocks yet.
Yeah. I think it's pretty much common sense that any international news, anyone following this space right now amongst investors, all eyes are on the US market, and it's just about the waiting game right now. And that's where we're at. Mackenzie Peterson writes, dominoes and cannabis do go good together, though. That is actually a very good point, Mackenzie.
Absolutely.
Jungle Java says, I was just going to say, Dan looks very spiffy today. So good shout out to Jungle Java. One thing I also wanted to bring up, too, we actually pushed out a tweet over the weekend. It was outlining that there's now 163 institutions holding MSOs. Somebody commented, if that's the case, we always talk about how this industry is 90% retail. So how can that be when a site like Fintel.io is outlining 163 institutions are currently holding the ETF?
Well, remember MSOS is close to $1 billion fund, so leaves room for lots of shareholders. Now, we don't get access to who all those shareholders are. Those names and addresses are controlled by the brokerage firms that people invest with. But every year there's a prospectus renewal. Every year there's an annual report. Every 6 months there's a semi-annual report. And we hope that everybody opts into electronic delivery, but some people don't. We have to print and mail them a annual report or semi-annual report. The reason I'm going down this bunny trail is
that still exists.
I saw the last counts that we have over 80,000 shareholders as of the last, regulatory document to be sent out. So it's a little bit like a barbell type of approach. Well, it's not even an approach. It's what the fund is. There are big family offices. You can see the 13F, 13G reports, so on. Big family offices, a number of hedge funds, cannabis specialty funds. And then there's all the market makers and authorized participants. And people need to understand this because MSOS has a lot of options business traded, on both sides, calls, puts, whatever, knock yourself out. We also have the 2X version, MSOX of the fund. That has to be done with our swap counterparties.
Yeah. Okay.
The reason I'm bringing this up is there is a whole lot of long and short interest and options that have to be hedged. There's market makers in those options. They have to cover their positions. So a percentage of that 163, what you're calling institutions, are just the market makers with inventory, negative inventory, hedging positions, all that stuff. And then there's a large amount of family offices, and we're in contact with a number of those family offices that have got in touch with us and let us know who they are and had conversations. And there's a bunch of others that aren't. But still, 163 air quote institutions, that doesn't have any pension money. We don't have any, index inclusion money. There's all sorts of regular-ish institutions that most mutual funds and ETFs have as shareholders. So we're still just scratching the surface of that because it's funds and family offices, things like that are allowed to hold our fund.
Dan, so you mentioned market makers, and I think that is a term that gets loosely thrown around the cannabis space, especially in terms of how people define it. Can you just set the record straight as to what a market maker is and how they're facilitating transactions and how they can play inside with what you guys are doing with MSOS?
Yeah. And there's plenty of education out there on our website and other people's websites, and hell, the great Jane Jungle Java will supply some of it to you guys. So every stock, every exchange traded fund has dozens, if not more, market makers involved because they set the bid ask price. That's it. So somebody's trading at the bid, somebody's trading at the ask. They're posting, prices. They're simply doing order flow, keeping things moving in an orderly fashion. An extra wrinkle with an exchange traded fund, an ETF, and that's what makes it different than a mutual fund. It's listed on an exchange, so you have to have market makers out there. And the more market makers, the merrier. That makes the prices more efficient. Rather than just depending on one or two or three, I want a whole bunch of market makers. Those market makers will also do creations and redemptions in a fund. And again, nothing crazy going on here, people. That's just the way the ETF works. There's creations and redemptions every day in SPY and ARC and every other ETF on the planet. They're creating, they're redeeming, they're keeping it. That's what keeps an ETF near its intrinsic value. And I'm throwing around terms here I hope aren't bad, but that's what makes an ETF different than a closed-end fund. A closed-end fund can trade at a big discount to its actual value. An ETF, our performance is simply a reflection of all the underlying holdings that we have, and it always ends up around there. So I don't know. I hope I'm not blathering on here, but that's what market makers do.
Oh no, that's
and that's
much
what authorized
appreciated.
participants do.
Yeah. I had the question before the podcast came on, so I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that like to ask, but if they wanted to find out more information, they could find it on your website as well.
There's a lot of information on our website, and heck, sometimes Jane answers people's questions online with, hey, here's a piece from Wisdom Tree, here's a piece from BlackRock. Go to the big ETF shops, and what is an ETF? How's an ETF work? What's a creation unit? What's a redemption unit?
Yeah, all those flow charts are very helpful.
So who's responsible for the price action today? Because I don't think we can blame blame the MJUS.
It's my fault
anymore.
It's all my fault.
Yeah.
I've said this before. When we don't have concrete positive news, or we don't have any rumors or conjecture that everybody's getting all excited about, cannabis stocks are going to drift down. It's just it's cannabis. It's OTC for the most part. We have a couple on TSX now, and we have ancillary companies on the exchanges, and we have the LPs. But come on, for the most part, we're talking about OTC stocks. The volumes are still anemic compared to even Tilray and Aurora, but certainly anemic compared to NYSE and NASDAQ listed stocks. So it doesn't surprise me to see a red day like this. Not big volume, nothing really to worry about because red day that's not big volume. That's just the best par for the course. Yeah. And you know what? I may or may not have done a little buying of the dip, looking at what stocks are beat up the most. Sometimes on a day like this, I'll look at what stocks need some love, what stocks are some bargains if I'm going to buy a little bit of them. But I also might want to hold back a little bit of cash. The fund doesn't have much cash in it anyway. It's mostly fully invested. But heck, we got earnings season coming up.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Everybody just hold on tight and keep your eye on the long-term horizon.
Forgive me if we brought this up before, but what year did the the ETF launch? What year is it? How many years has it been now?
That's a great question. 2021, I think.
80-some thousand investors now. I always like to ask this question. What do you think you've learned most about yourself in the cannabis space? It's a pretty big, broad question, is it not?
I like to think that I have a fairly calm demeanor, and I think that portfolio management's a little bit more of an art than a science, depending on how you're doing it. We know other portfolio managers are total quants, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I have learned to be even more chill. And less emotional. I already thought I had that as a portfolio manager because I've been doing this for a while before cannabis. And no, I have learned to be extremely chill, not upset, focused on the long term. And it still bothers me a little bit. My moods are depending on if I see green or red, but
I hear you.
But that's not much.
Well, listen, we appreciate these segments every Monday. Cleve Noyes writes in big capital letters, must have patience. And that is easier said than done in the cannabis space, is it not?
It's very much easier said than done because we've been gut punched so darn many times. The memes of Lucy pulling the football away and all that.
Everybody's middle name is FOMO in this industry, right?
Yeah. But hey, more questions. Anybody put questions into the comments there if you want to ask me.
MSOS launched September 2020 and caught that. I think it dropped to it started at 25, dropped to 20, and then I think in February 21 it got up to 45, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going off memory, so. It's been a few years.
Yeah, it has been a few years. And something we could do is I could refresh myself on that. And maybe next week we can talk about the history of it a little bit.
Okay.
Because, we first had this Vice ETF, small ETF, but in its prospectus was the first place that we mentioned the word cannabis. And that set off all kinds of questions at our custody bank and at the New York Stock Exchange, everybody else. And then we launched YOLO with a lot of conversations and legal opinions and everything else. And MSOS was in registration for an entire year. From when we first filed that prospectus until we actually launched, there's a whole year of a bunch of legal stuff. So I can go in more depth about that next week if you guys want.
I mean, Dan, one question that I have is you mentioned cash. So, I mean, you guys have inflows, you're deploying cash all the time. Are there certain mandates or any kind of like balances that you have to adhere to from a cash standpoint, as far as like it coming into the fund and getting deployed, or what you decide to hold in reserves?
There's a number of things. The simplest one is the prospectus, and under normal circumstances, the fund's going to have at least 80% invested in cannabis stocks and swaps that represent the same type of exposure. Again, that's under normal circumstances, and that's a name rule, 80% rule. Usually, a fund can't be overdrawn unless somebody's going to say, it has derivative use, it has this, it's part of the fund's mandate. We have an unusual situation in the fact that we got hundreds of millions of dollars in cash. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in collateral accounts for the total return swaps. And I have hundreds of millions of dollars earning interest at Bank of New York Mellon. They're paying me a real good interest rate. So when you add all those things up, because we have hundreds of millions of dollars of cash, sometimes the fund can be a little overexposed.
Right.
Because I got tons of cash to back it up.
Right.
And sometimes the fund can be a little bit underexposed. But I've said this before, I'm not trying to get cute with it. I'm not trying to time the market. I'm not going to try to run the fund tactically. For the most part, it's designed to be near 100% invested in its underlying stocks and total return swap.
Makes sense. Well, I think next Monday we'll bring up, we'll start promoting this a couple days in advance. It'll be like open mic night. Lots of questions. Feel free to ask any questions regarding Dan and just how the ETF operates and works, the history behind it all. If there's any questions that you want, we'll drop some comments below. And the best question, we'll give away a TDR hoodie. How's that sound for next Monday? I think that's what we'll do. I know, right? In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week. We'll be watching this closely, and I'm sure we'll be exchanging tweets back and forth of these latest earnings. But tell the crew we say hi, and we'll see you next Monday.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Appreciate it.
Always helpful to have him on every Monday. But yeah, to our audience, leave some comments below. Let us know throughout the week too. Go onto our community page and let us know questions that you want us to ask Dan. We'll open that up to the community. And any questions that you want. Christopher Brady, man, you're on a roll. There are a lot of questions here. Coanada actually wrote, I love this one. Where was it? I hope the DEA news gets released during a live stream with TDR. It shall be legendary. That would be legendary. All right, gents, I think that pretty much wraps up for the week. But we'll check back in. Big just show coming up Wednesday with Pablo to talk about that German report. And then as well, we will have a breakdown of what do we got? What's the schedule? Is it Wednesday?
IPR is probably announced already. I'm going to start going through those once we get off.
Okay, we'll touch on that.
And then on Wednesday, we have GTI.
GTI Wednesday, and then Verano and Trulieve is Thursday. Pre-market?
Thursday, 29th.
Nice. We've reached out for our audience too to Kim Rivers to see if we can get her on. We'll keep you posted once we hear back. We've also reached out to the Verano team and Aaron Miles. And again, we'll keep you guys posted. If not this week, then hopefully next week we'll get them on the podcast again. Guap, Anthony, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We'll check back with you on Wednesday.
All right. See you guys.
Oh, by the way, before we go.
Oh, reggae on a Monday?
Great idea, Mitch, on the Evergreen piece of content. about moneymakers. And speaking of Mitch, how about a big congrats? The producer is a proud father, brought in 2 beautiful twins over the weekend. Antonio and William, correct, Mitch?
You got it. You got it. I'll tell you one thing, though. Even during this show, I got a nice idea. You guys want to understand market makers? You guys really want to understand the investment world? Stay tuned. I got something good for you.
Nice. Love the guy. We talk about, his 2 kids, and the guy's just thinking about work all the time. Very, very dedicated. But Mitch, congrats to you, your wife, 2 kids, big family. Leave some comments below. Give some likes to this video, everybody. Mitch is the man as well. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with your network. And please subscribe to our TDR daily daily newsletter. Baked in, lots of great information about the latest events going on in cannabis. Written by our CFA and head of research, Bill McNarland. Gents, enjoy the rest of your day. See you Wednesday. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe.